All right. Good morning and welcome back. I hope that you had a great weekend. You're really close here to the end of the quarter. In fact, this is week 9. This is the final week with any sort of new content related to the course. And next week is our final week in which people will share presentations from their group observation assignments. So we're really close to the end. After that week 10, we aren't going to have any sort of meeting for the final exam window. So that'll be about it. And so my goal at this stage is to help you, as you're gearing up to wrap up for your classes and all of that, just to know what to expect for this class and the remaining things that you need to do in order to be in the best position possible to get a good grade and get the credits that you need. I should also add, just as a reminder, if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to meet with your advisor and start registering for your spring classes, since those will start to fill up pretty quickly. And also, it's a great opportunity for you to get your prereqs and general education requirements and all of that good stuff out of the way. So just wanted to put that on your radar. So as we get started for today, I've got several updates and reminders for you that will help you to prepare for the last few weeks. The first thing that I want to talk about, though, is the small group assessment. So I posted your grades on those. I'll also be going back through and adding some more detailed comments to help you out. So I wanted to give some general feedback and things that I noticed from this assignment, things that I can do to encourage you as you work on your observation assignment due by the end of this week that will help you for that. Overall, between your reflection to this small group assessment assignment, I think that people did really well. And I noticed some really major improvements across the board. So really good job there. One thing that I think people did a really good job of overall was better incorporating citations and supporting material. So I think that, for instance, folks that might have struggled with using citations or using the correct style in their reflection did a much better job this time around of incorporating those citations. So thanks for taking the time to do that and using some of those concepts from the course to support your key ideas. That's definitely something you'll want to continue to do as you gear up for your observation assignment. I also like the way that in this small group assessment, you will focus on some specific examples of some of the small group activities. For instance, some of you wrote about, planning the birthday party. Other people wrote about that brainstorming at the very beginning of the quarter where you're finding things in common. There are some really good examples that you all used of ways that you participated in groups. So things to keep working on. When you're incorporating some of those definitions and ideas, right, make sure that you are continuing to draw from, your citations and supporting material. For instance, if you're describing some of the methods of group structure or leadership, you might integrate a supporting citation or detail about group leadership styles. So continue to sort of draw back from the text as you're defining and laying out your terms. I think you'll be doing something similar for your membership observations. So make sure that you're, again, bringing those terms in and explaining what those terms are. And then one thing that I did notice, it felt like the section on culture, where for the membership assessment, I was asking you to think about sort of the way that culture played into your participation in the group, did feel like it could use a little bit more explanation in certain instances. So keep explaining, culture, what culture means to you, how things like positionality and identity might shape your participation in groups. For instance, folks that did really well in that section would say, hey, my culture is X, or I come from these combinations of culture. I found that when I was in a group that I was more likely to work with these sorts of people, or I found that my communication was a little bit different when I was in a group based on my own cultural background and experience. So sort of digging into your own background, your own experiences, and using that to explain some of the ways that you participated and interacted in groups was a lot of what I was looking for there. And again, I think a lot of folks did that pretty effectively. So again, really good work on these. Again, I think they were a noticeable improvement over your reflections, and I really appreciated the way you were using details there, and continue to gear up for your membership observation with this in mind. Please keep working on filling in the page limit, and remember, right, to think about, if you intend to turn it in late or use a get out of jail free card, just how that can affect share some details. Right. So what I want to do now is just give you a quick kind of calendar look at the remaining classes and what to expect. So this final week, new content, we'll be getting into the role of conflict in small group communication. If you've taken Comp 215, conflict management, that's a course that gets into those things in more detail. It's a great class to take if you're interested in understanding things about conflict. But for this class, we'll be talking about what it means for groups to be in conflict and how to manage conflict in groups effectively. So that'll be our stuff for this week. This Sunday is your small group observation essay due date. Again, I'm happy to look at rough drafts or outlines. If you're going to send those to me, ideally, I would receive that by the end of the day this Friday. So just keep that in mind as a date that you can send it to me if you want to send me a draft or outline. I also pushed back the quizzes in order to give you more time to complete them. Again, since I was coming in a little late last week following the accident. So the week 8 quiz, the quiz from last week, is not due until this Sunday. It's more of a kind of short essay style quiz. I kind of was listening to your feedback and suggestions and thought that that was a good way to approach doing the quiz. I'll also be posting the final quiz for this week on conflict management that'll be due on March 11th. And then lastly, I'll be posting the extra credit. In each class, I like to give the opportunity for people to do extra credit. If you've taken a class with me, you know how this goes. You complete the extra credit, it's totally optional, but if you do it, it'll add 20 points or 2% onto your final grade. It can be a huge lifesaver if you're on the border of a grade that you want, like you're a 78 and you want a B minus. And it can also be a good buffer if you already have a good grade and just want to make sure that you are really secure in the grade that you have. So I'll be posting that by the end of the day. So next week is the presentation dates. One thing I want to point out is that on days that you're not scheduled to present, I still really encourage you to come to class. I'll still be taking the regular attendance for those days, just because that's a great way that you can be in the audience to support other people. And I'll give folks that aren't presenting a short prompt to work on for attendance for that day. So please note your presentation schedule. I'll share that in a minute, but just make sure that you are planning out that next week with that in mind. And then the last thing that I wanted to point you to is that March 19th is going to be my hard cutoff for any remaining assignments in the course that haven't been turned in yet. For instance, these could be makeup assignments for classes that you've missed or anything else. The reason for that, right, is I have to formally submit grades to EOU by that time. And so by that time, I wouldn't be able to like change or be like, okay, you have your assignment in now, I can change your grade, right? I need to get those grades in by that date. Just want to let you know that that's that hard deadline. So those are the kind of remaining weeks and things we should expect from those weeks. Again, we don't have any sort of formal final exam meeting time, either face-to-face or remotely, because it'll be an opportunity for you to catch up on remaining assignments. And, right, to be honest, the spring break is incredibly short as it is. I'd rather you have more time to do what you need for other classes and gear up for the spring. Any questions so far? Anything related to the remaining classes, schedule, anything like that? If questions do come up at any point, please let me know. As a reminder, right, the small group observation is due by Sunday. At this stage, right, I really encourage you, if you haven't already done your observation, to try to get that in the next couple days. So please make sure to figure out and resolve that and let me know if you're still running into issues with figuring out what that observation is, since you'll need to transition from observing the group to writing about the group. And then I wanted to give some advice here with regard to the presentation and things that you should expect for the presentation. So I'll skip ahead for one moment and just repost that schedule, right? So I posted the schedule for presentation on Canvas last week, but also wanted to put it up here so that you know the date that you're scheduled to present. I also have this in order presentation, who's going to present first, second, third, and so on. I tried to honor the preferences of folks who has conflicts or really strongly wanted to present on a particular date. If you did not fill out the form, then I just slotted you in. So I encourage you to, double check, make sure that you're available on that date. If you are not available for that date of presentation, send me an email as soon as possible. That way I can help to reschedule you. So next Monday, next Wednesday, and next Friday. So that's the presentation schedule as I have it. And again, it's also posted on Canvas. So be prepared for that particular date. So what I want to do now is show you the rubric and expectations for this assignment on Canvas. Again, I like to have that all there for you so that you know kind of exactly what to expect. If you click on the presentation here, that'll show up. Again, you can click it here. And hopefully, right, this presentation is fairly straightforward because you've already done a lot of the work to work on the observation and write the essay itself. So rather than ask you to do a big whole new writing assignment, right, I am asking you just to apply and to use the things that you've developed already. So as mentioned, right, the purpose of this presentation next week is just to share what you completed and worked on for your small group observation. I know that some of you might not be done by Sunday or might be using a get out of jail free card. If that's the case, right, the presentation is sharing the results or the things that you've developed so far for your presentation. So use it to share either your completed project or the progress that you have. I have that schedule on Canvas and through the slides. I am expecting you to present face-to-face on the scheduled date, since this is a face-to-face class with like the Zoom option for folks that are unable to make it, like emergency, travel, quarantine, that sort of thing. If you find that you're not able to present face-to-face on your scheduled date, let me know and we can figure out an option for you. But I am sort of asking folks to come face-to-face if they can. If like an emergency happens, if you get placed under quarantine or something like that, like right at the time you're scheduled to present, that's okay. Just let me know, give me the information that I need, and we'll figure out an option for you. And I am asking, based on the number of folks that we have in the class and all of that, that your presentation only be 5 to 6 minutes in length. Hopefully that takes some pressure off. You're not doing the big 10 to 15 minute presentation or anything like that. Just that we've got, close to 20 people in the class. We've got 3 days, and time-wise, that's just sort of how the math breaks down. So what I ask you to do is to really try to time and practice for yourself so that you can consistently get it in that 5 to 6 minute window. I will kind of stop you or give you a little bit of time to wrap up if you reach the 6 minute mark. So I just gotta be the timekeeper and make sure we can get through everybody's presentations, since we have such short class meetings at only 50 minutes. I am asking you to use some type of visual aid. The easiest way to do this is with these slides that go over some of the key content or ideas. You can use things like PowerPoint, you can use things like Prezi or Google Slides. If you want to get creative and show something like a video or images or something like that, or even bring in a visual aid, you could do that too. But if you are using some type of slides or material like that, I'm asking you to send that to me in advance before you're scheduled to present, so that I can make sure to get that pulled out for you. And you can submit it either through email or through small group observation, presentation, assignment as well. This isn't a public speaking class, right? I know that a lot of us are not excited or super comfortable with speaking in groups. So I'm not asking you to be like a perfect and polished public speaker. That's not really what I'm grading you on. Instead, I'm asking you to show kind of preparation. So have you kind of rehearsed, planned, and prepared for this assignment? And if you've done so, right, that will help a lot. You can't use get out of jail free card on your presentation because it's the end of the quarter, and you have that slotted day to present. And if you're not able to make the presentation outside of a documented emergency or conflict, right, then you would just sort of miss that assignment. So let me know if something comes up that affects your ability to present. In your presentation, I encourage you to do the following. to share what the meeting is that you observed. So again, as you talked about in your observation essay, what was the meeting? What was the place, the time? Was it face-to-face or virtual? Who was there, right? And why you chose that meeting. You don't need a laundry list of everybody that was there, right? Just give me a larger sense of the types of folks that were at this meeting. For instance, this was about a dozen other college students or something like that. What happened? So you might talk about what happened at this meeting using things like leadership and organizational styles. For instance, maybe you were at an ASDOU student senate meeting and they passed some type of resolution or plan about like doing outdoor activities on campus or something like that. So share a little bit there about this meeting. And then some of the key ideas or things that you've learned. Again, you don't need to go into detail about every single thing that you covered in the essay. You probably can't get through that in about 6 minutes. But some of the key takeaways or things that you learned from that process are things that you could share with the group. So you don't need to be comprehensive for your entire essay, but you should focus on some of the highlights and things that you learned through the process. I'll look at rough drafts or outlines of slides, or even if you want to do like a practice presentation with me, I'd be available to do that too, face-to-face or through Zoom. So substance and style, right? Did you explain the meeting, the details about that meeting, what happened, leadership and organization? Did you present on time? Did you use that face-to-face or the prior arrangement with me? Does it show that you prepared and kind of rehearsed and practiced? I asked, for sure on presentation days, please try to make sure to come to class on time, right? If you come in late and somebody's presenting, wait for that person to finish presenting before you walk into the room. We'll try to do like a round of applause after somebody has finished presenting so that we can indicate when somebody is able to come in. Please make sure if you're presenting, right, that you stay for the full class after you presented, right? So it's not like a dine and dash, here's my presentation, okay, bye. You can continue to remain a part of the audience for other people. So just wanted to let you know, again, some of the expectations there. Because you're already doing the sort of content-oriented work in the essay itself, I'm hoping that this is a pretty easy and seamless transition into the presentation. You already know some of the big things that you're talking about and working on, so you can easily kind of transfer that stuff over. Some tips for doing this presentation that I want to share before I open stuff up for questions. First of all, use that rubric and presentation schedule. Use that 5 to 6 minutes. Again, 6 minutes is the hard limit. I'll ask you to finish up your sentence or thought. You hit that 6-minute mark. 6 minutes goes by a lot faster than you might think, right? If you've done a presentation before, you know the time passes quickly. So I definitely encourage you to really practice and rehearse. Again, you're presenting face-to-face unless you've made a prior arrangement with me. I am still counting attendance for days that you're not presenting. Send me those visual aids or slides. And again, if there's like an unexcused reason that you're not coming, that would just be something you miss. So I really encourage you, I think the easiest thing to do is to do some practice runs, maybe with your roommate or friends or family members or something, where you just share the slides or things that you're working on and try to consistently hit that like 5 to 6 minute mark. If you're at 5:30, you're golden. So, one thing that you can do is sort of do the presentation a few times, time yourself, and change the amount of content that you have based on what you find yourself doing time-wise. One rule of thumb that I like is to think about the number of slides or visual aids that you have related to the number of minutes that you have. So for instance, you might think about a slide taking about anywhere between 1 to 2 minutes long. With that being the case, you might only have like 3 or 4 slides. So if you have like a dozen slides, you're probably not going to burn through those in 5 minutes. Print a copy of like things like your slides, or maybe some of your notes to yourself, or maybe an outline of some of the key things that you want to cover in your presentation. I really encourage the use of having something like an outline or notes in advance that can really help you so that you can draw back from that. That way you're not like reading top of something that you can jog your memory if there's something that you know that you need to cover. So focus on identifying and presenting some of your key ideas clearly, right? For instance, saying, hey, in this presentation, I noticed that this group used Robert's Rules of Order. Here's how they use them, right? Can be a really good way to help organize your presentation. And as I mentioned, if it's not done, share what you've gathered, share the progress that you've made so far. And as long as you do that, you're still in good shape. All right, so I know that I covered a lot of ground related to what I'm expecting for this presentation. Are there any questions so far? Things that are coming out? Okay. Again, please, if you're feeling like speech anxiety or anxiousness, please let me know. I come from a background of competitive speech and debate. I've worked with a lot of folks who do not like getting up and presenting in front of the group, so I recognize that. This is kind of a, a supportive setting, and I hope that this is an area where you feel comfortable having a conversation with us about what it is that you've been working on. All right, so I want to do a quick recap of last class before we get into the new stuff for today. We were talking about group motivation, some of the related issues with getting people in a group engaged and on topic. We talked about how, right? If you think back to B.F. Skinner, behaviorism and the idea of motivating and reinforcing behavior, right? The rat pushes the button and gets a treat, and it's going to push the button more time. So when we motivate people in a group, right, we're presenting some type of reward or incentive, and we're consistently ensuring that that incentive or reward is given. We also talked about the idea that we can promote collaboration, the idea that people in groups are more than the sum of their parts. They're working together and creating good relationships with each other, rather than just being people that are randomly placed in a group, right? If you think about the overall organization of the group, its memory, its history, and the ways that those can shape the current behavior and actions of the group. And then lastly, we talked about the idea that good groups involve giving good feedback, right? Ensuring that members of the group understand what the expectations are, how to do well in groups, and so on. Feedback is a way to course correct and to help groups work well. We mentioned this, like if you're coaching like a middle school soccer team, that your feedback might be pretty encouraging. So for today, we talked about group presentation and observation. We will get into conflict and how conflict connects to group behavior and why conflict is such a large presence in the way that we engage groups. So what I want you to do is to take some time to either write or type for your attendance for today. And what I want you to think about is a time that you were involved in some type of conflict that was related to a group or organization that you were a part of. Chances are, within the group that you're a member of currently or one that you've been a part of in the past, there has been some situation in which conflict has come up. And then secondarily, how did your group manage or deal with this conflict? And I want you to talk about some of the strategies that your group used. Give you one example. When I traveled with my team for speech and debate, one time I was tasked with driving this like big caravan and following another car. The problem was that I was pretty new to driving and I didn't know how to use lights. And so rather than turning the regular light on, which I didn't figure out how to do, I kept turning on the brights. So I flashed the brights would stop and then they'd flash again. And obviously that looks pretty weird and symbolizes, potentially aggressive behavior. And so as I was following my teammates in the other car, they started to freak out because they saw this car behind them that kept flashing its brights over and over. And it started getting really evasive and like trying to dodge me. And I kept trying to follow it. And eventually we pulled over and realized it was my car, and they were really frustrated and like scared because they didn't realize that I was in there. So it's an example, right, of conflict where misunderstanding created this sort of anxiety or fear, and it was resolved because we were able to understand what was actually going on. So that's one example. I want you to think about an example for yourself, and in just a little bit, I'll ask people to go around and share some of the examples dealing with conflicting groups that stood out. We'll give you another couple minutes or so on this. and wrap up the current thought or idea. So I'm going to ask everybody to share and take a moment to explain what this conflict was and how this group attempted to manage or to deal with the conflict. So let's start with the folks here on Zoom and just go down the line here. So Meg, let's start with you.
So I said that one time when a group had a conflict was in my FFA chapter, and we had to decide what we were going to do for our chapter banquet at the end of the year. And like how we managed to deal with this conflict is like we brainstormed all of the ideas and like all the possibilities, because like with COVID it was harder to put on the banquet, and like because of our decision we weren't able to have our advisor there, but we were able to do more things with the decision that we made.
Great, thanks for sharing. Kate, how about you?
Yeah, okay. So my conflict was the fact that I was working overtime for 2 weeks in a row, and I was really burnt out. So I asked my assistant managers if I could leave just an hour early, in which case they laughed in my face. So I didn't feel great about that. So my managers didn't do anything to deal with the issue, and they didn't even give me a break during my 11-hour day. But my coworkers did make it more manageable by giving me the easier tasks, which helped a little.
Great, thanks for sharing. Guy, how about you?
For my case, I conflict with my soccer coach. Actually, I'm talking about trainer, and then there's like some misunderstanding communication, and then he pissed me off, and then I'm kind like I'm mad too, and then there's not good talk.
Sure.
Like that.
Sure, right. Emotions, frustration, anger can definitely make that process of negotiating and managing conflict a lot more difficult. Francis.
So there was a time when my friend and I were supposed to take on this mentor role, but we didn't know when we would start and how we would do it, because we just found out through records in our account that showed our position as a mentor for a program. And the person who made us mentors didn't mention anything to us about it at all. So we were just frustrated because they were expecting something from us that we couldn't understand or were unaware of because of lack of communication. And so the person who made us mentors finally sat us down because she felt that there was a disconnect between us, and she saw that we weren't filling in our mentor roles. But by speaking about how I felt and her saying her side as well, through communication, we just solved that confusion or conflict.
Sure. The role of like misunderstanding or unclear expectations can definitely make that entire process a lot harder for sure. Millie?
So my conflict was also within my like chapter FFA team. We were just experiencing a lot of disagreements around the same time. We were in a pretty big group at the time. I think there were 9 of us total. And so there were sides being chosen. And if there was conflict between 2 people, everybody else in the group felt like they had to support one or the other. And so it was really just a petty time as well. I feel like nobody was really acting like mature students or anything, but my advisor initiated to fix the situation. He took a couple of us older members aside and asked our opinions and what he thinks we should do, what he thought we should do. And we just organized time to meet with smaller groups and discuss, and also just as a whole to just discuss what was going on and how we needed to really get over it, but how we were going to get over it.
Sure. Sometimes there needs to be that place to process and deal with the issue as it comes up and really to figure out a solution together. How about Andre?
I just said I talked about one time in high school, just like on the football team, we were down by 2 touchdowns, and in the first half, we just kept protecting the run first, even though they kept passing. So it was just like super frustrating. People just like weren't communicating on the field, so it was just like, I don't know, it was just super frustrating, and we just kept getting like they kept scoring on us. So at halftime, we just came together, and I just told everyone that we needed to communicate better and that we needed to stop going run first. And once we did, we changed to pass first, and they weren't able to pass on us as much anymore. And we ended up being able to come back and win. So,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the way you're framing sort of conflict as course correction here. For sure. Destiny?
So I wouldn't really get into conflict, but the one thing that happened to me was I had a coworker, and her and I were pretty close, really good friends at the beginning. And then it kind of took a turn when, because I was really nice to her, she started to become like really comfortable, and she would say really like rude things out of nowhere. I was a lot more reserved, and she put herself out there, which was fine, but sometimes it would make me really uncomfortable. And so that was kind of what happened, is just, she like said something to me one time and I was like, oh, okay. And then the way that I attempted to, deal with this conflict was I just told my manager, communicated it with her, and she talked to both of us just to get both sides. And we had a conversation just to sort out our differences. And basically I just had to establish boundaries, and that was it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, comfort can be nice, but comfort, as you mentioned, can also make people cross boundaries that we're not wanting them to do. And see,
I couldn't really think of an exact time, but me and my brothers used to get annoyed with each other and argue all the times. But usually the problem we had was lack of communication. But when we ended up communicating with each other, it was usually like a misunderstanding, and we were arguing for no reason.
yeah, so oftentimes it can be difficult to trace like the origin or cause of a potential conflict too. So let's hear from the folks here face to face, and we'll start here on this side and go from there. Yeah.
Alright, so it wasn't a personal conflict, but so every Wednesday at my old work, we'd have a safety meeting, and we would talk about our incidents or close calls. And one of the guys said it, and it came close. His incident came close to taking someone's life, and another employee got really mad at him, started yelling at him, and our supervisor just told him to go wait outside. And I'm assuming they had a talk after, but he wasn't allowed to work for the rest of that day.
Yeah, so sometimes you don't know the full extent of what's going on in a conflict, but you do know there's something going down and something that's causing sources of disagreement. Yeah. Go for it.
And then, so I chose, when I was part of my high school football team, I got into like a physical altercation with like one of my teammates, and just like one of those things that happen in practice. And I thought in hindsight might have been bad, but it's better for us to like hash that out, and then we actually end up becoming closer. But
yeah,
but at the beginning of it, I felt like I kind of got over really quick, and my other teammate was like held more of a grudge for a little bit longer than I would. But in hindsight of that conflict, I felt like it was better for our relationship and stuff like that for that to deal out. And then honestly, no one in the group really managed the conflict. No one really, they just kind of like separated us, and then no one really like brought it up or talked about it, or like we eventually talked about it. I talked about it with my teammate, but no one in the group really like did anything to like help mitigate the situation or anything like that.
Yeah, sometimes people just have like this sort of shock response, like what do I do? And at the same time, right, conflict can also be sort of window into having a good or constructive relationship with somebody once it's dealt with, for sure.
I don't know, I was running a conflict regarding a social media account. The leader was very unprofessional and just went around the other person's back and released like non-quality media rather than really confronting it. She just avoided it completely and went, I'm the boss, I'm gonna do this. But
sure. Yeah, right. So sometimes social media can add these complications where people are being inappropriate or weird or frustrating to deal with in a way that, due to missing subtext and all of that stuff is happening differently.
I chose a conflict that happened before practice for my high school
team.
Uh-huh.
In the locker room, one of the smaller guys being bullied, and then one of the D linemen stood up for him and got into a fight with the guy out bullying him. And as a result of it, pulled him apart, and the coaches walked in and then pulled them both into the coach's office and talked to them. But they can't do that. It happens again. They're both gone.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So sometimes we see conflict happening, we want to like intervene to support and help people that it seems like are being picked on or bullied, but that can also sort of contribute to those broader issues of conflict that might be coming up for sure.
I did for ignorance just had person out in charge of the venue supposed to call in, set up stuff. When you go talk to them, found out they haven't called the venue at all or communicated because they were afraid of talking on the phone. Whatever resolved that was, the group decided that I should just call in and just take care of it.
Yeah.
Because so, and another way we just had Virgo help with other things, and it would kind of just help us figure out what roles people should be playing in our setup for all of it, I guess.
Yeah, it can be really frustrating when there's a potential conflict situation and like people don't deal with it and it just gets kicked down and procrastinated on to the point that it becomes a much bigger deal.
Yeah. The date that we were gonna hold it on.
Yeah, that's awful. It's really, yeah, if somebody doesn't get on the phone, doesn't do that basic resolution of those issues, it really can drag everybody down for sure. Lynn?
Okay, so I talked about when I was an officer for Keephorn High School, and it was when the officers decided to talk to our advisor about her potentially quitting because she wasn't giving us the support we needed. So we wound up writing a letter and reading it out loud to her, and she did decide to quit after a little bit after that. But then now, and then we were left without an advisor for about 8 months, which was not super great. But we did end up finding a different teacher who was doing a amazing job now.
That's great. Yeah, it can definitely be an opportunity to recognize the challenges of an existing group. Maybe to refresh or change that group.
In high school basketball, we had a fight that through the benches. We were losing by 30. So there were already people named Joe. So I was on the bench.
Wow.
And feet got tangled. There was shoving, pushing, backwards. So bench cleared both sides. And then I thought it was way in this room. No, well, yeah, like once by my teammate. He was a hothead. So the coaches and I, my other captain, we got off the bench and pulled people away from the conflict down in the middle of it. Tactical were given out and checked. 35 seconds. It was very unnecessary.
Yeah. Yeah. Reminds me of like the fights that they've had in the bleachers and Squid Game. Like I was getting that energy in that, right? Yeah. So definitely a problem where like physical altercations can feel really unnecessary. So a few trends and things that I noticed that you all pointed out, right? So first of all, oftentimes conflict in groups happens because we have a particular person who's like instigating conflict or being aggressive or creating an issue for everybody else, right? Sometimes in dealing with that person, people are able to work together and create a good relationship with that person, as was mentioned, or sometimes, right, it can lead to changing hands, changing leadership and organization, and so on. So specific individuals are definitely a problem. Another issue is lack of communication, right? You don't make the call, you don't do basic things that would allow for it to function, and that can definitely snowball and create a much bigger issue. So confronting and dealing with conflict as it comes up is definitely a really important area too. And then another thing that I was kind of noticing in dealing with conflict is that we don't always know where it comes from. Sometimes there can be a boiling point, like siblings or other people are frustrated with each other, or there are moments where conflict is really well defined and you know what people are in disagreement with. So I really appreciate you sharing, really starting to point to some of the trends and issues of dealing with conflict. That it happens in groups a lot. It happens if we're interacting with people with whom we don't always agree, and sometimes it can escalate in a way that feels unnecessary or frustrating or dumb. So I think that's a good setup for us to start to think about the ways in which conflict can impact our communication. So the sort of overarching question is whether or not conflict is bad. And the answer is no, right? Conflict can really be a source for good because it does provide people with the opportunity to hash out differences, to deal with challenges, and to create increased honesty. If you think, for instance, about couples that are dating or married, right? It's found that couples that have an appropriate level of conflict, they're not like throwing things at each other, but they are disagreeing openly on certain situations, might be more healthy than couples that never disagree. We oftentimes associate a lack of conflict with a sign of health, and that's not always the case because there are inevitably points where we don't agree, and being able to openly express those disagreements can prevent resentment from building up later over time, right? We might think back to groupthink, the idea that people will self-censor or not fully share the challenges or issues that they're dealing with because they simply care about appealing to the interests of the group. And that can be unhealthy over time. Good ideas and perspectives aren't brought to the table. People feel like they're uncomfortable being honest and sharing the concerns that they have. So conflict, if it's appropriate, if it fits in the situation, can be a really good and useful tool. Conflict is something we see everywhere, right? Conflict will happen because you have different values, beliefs, interests, and concerns in the group, right? Conflict is often about scarce resources. The idea here being that when you're in a small group, that there are only so many people who can speak, address, or deal with an issue. If you're managing something like a budget or funding, there's inevitably conflict over who gets funding, where that money is going to go. Conflict happens. If you and other people want a job and you're applying, you're vying for that job, right? Not everybody is on the same page about what you want to happen. Conflict involves interfering or getting involved. Some of you mentioned like stepping into a conflict. Conflict does not mean that a relationship is bad. It can mean a relationship is healthy because there's open disagreement. Conflict can't just be avoided or resolved, right? We oftentimes are motivated toward conflict resolution, and classes, including those at EOU, are more about conflict management, dealing with the inevitability or challenge that we have associated with conflict as it happens. And then the last thing that I want to hit on before we wrap up for today is the idea that there's some different leadership strategies that people can take to deal with conflict. So we'll hit on some of these more next class, but I want to talk about the ways in which leaders can take on these different types of roles to impact the way that members of the group behave, are organized, and so on. Before we wrap up, I do want to do a quick poll. So raise your hand. You can also use the React on Zoom to raise your hand. If it would be useful if Friday was an attendance optional workshop day for people that are trying to work on their presentations, essays, and all that. A lot of hands, a lot of nodding. Yeah, a lot of people doing that. Okay. I know this is the top point in the quarter, and I also know a lot of people are traveling and doing stuff on Friday. And I also know that some people are in the process of doing their observations, and having Friday as a chance to do that might be easier. So we'll do that. So we'll meet today and we'll meet on Wednesday. And then Friday, I'll be here, and I'll be here to help you workshop your presentation or essay or anything else. I just know that this is the rough point in the quarter, and I would much rather have a really good and prepared project you're working on rather than feel this kind of scramble as we're working through. So cool, let's do that.
I have a question. It
Yeah, what's
says
up?
that the weeknight quiz and extra credit are due on 3/11. That's a Friday, not a Sunday.
Oh, let me fix that. So that would be the 13th. Yes. So I'll update that for you. Thanks for pointing that out. So I'll add that as an announcement on campus. So continue to work on preparing for those presentations and essay. We talked about some of the benefits and good things that conflict can do in groups, and we'll hit more on those for next class. Some of the ways that conflict can impact the way that our groups behave. So go ahead and passport or email the prompt that I asked you to work on earlier in class. Have a great rest of your day. I'll update you on Canvas about that good stuff, and we'll meet again on Wednesday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Will you be able to